I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll cover the National Signing Day. We'll talk about the additions, the misses, and our overall thoughts on the class, as well as our thoughts on Billy Napier so far. Will, this was an interesting signing day. A lot of hope coming into it. Didn't get to necessarily fulfill the heights of that hope. Missed out on a couple of big names, which we'll get to in a minute here. But the fact that we walked into this day with hope, that says something, right?
I mean, I suppose so. It's funny because I feel like even in the Mullen and McElwain eras, you sort of walked into National Signing Day going, well, come on, like just make the change. So, and it never really came. And that's one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind is that this is a transition class. The transition class tends to be something that obviously is a step back from what you're used to. And the thing you really want to evaluate people on is the bump class. But at the same time, you want the best players you can get at any given time. And some of the guys they missed on are a problem, but some of the guys we're going to talk about who are additions, I think are good additions. And I want to make sure I think one of the reasons that you and I decided to put that up front is to make sure that we talk about the guys who are adding to the team because they're going to bring value to the Gators.
And let's jump right into that with two bits. Billy Napier in his press conference, he identified the team's biggest needs as running back, critical need for depth. He said they ended up signing ETN there. Pretty good pickup there for them. Missed out on Citizen. We'll get there in a minute. Corner, 4 gets in the secondary. That's not bad. Offensive line, 2 transfers and and 2 high school players. And defensive line across the board, he called it a diverse group, but bunch of help along that defensive front there. He said each year they're trying to develop depth on the team. So this was a start. Obviously, you call it the transition class. Not a lot of time to work with these guys. And he felt they made good work out of each opportunity they had, the visits in December, the portal, and finally National Signing Day here in February. But we've talked about a bunch of these players already that have been committed on the show, so we don't want to get repetitive for our audience. So we'll focus on the guys who just came along here in the last couple of weeks here. Jack Pyburn, edge out of Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, specifically the Bulls School, 6'3", 265. By the way, Napier in his press conference, I think Nick Delatorre called him out. just would talk about a guy who throws height and weight behind the name every single time. Very impressive. Didn't look like he had any notes in front of that. Nick asked him if he had any notes. I thought that was funny. He's like, yeah, no, I don't. He's like, our guys keep me informed pretty well. But Andrew Ivins from 24/7 Sports called Pyburn. He said Pyburn was utilized as an inside backer and a stand-up edge rusher at the prep level. He excelled at both spots as he racked up over 20 sacks and close to 50 tackles for a loss his final 2 years of high school. An effort-based player with a motor that tends to run pretty hot, likely to grow into a more traditional defensive end or even an interior defensive lineman given his movement patterns and muscular build. Will, this is a guy, again, early on, Billy stressed he was looking for available players. And this is a guy you have a shot on that is athletic. You have a chance to develop him. I think it's a nice pickup in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we focus on 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, and that sort of stuff. And obviously Pyburn's a 3-star, but he's a high 3-star, right? So ranked 441st overall, classified as an edge rusher, but sort of a hybrid edge rusher / linebacker. And when you think about where Florida needs help at that defensive end position, they've only got 8 guys now, if you count Pyburn there, and then they've only got 8 linebackers as well. And so having Pyburn in the fold there at that defensive end linebacker position means they got some flexibility and really hopefully means that they're going to be able to do some things on the defensive line without necessarily having to bring in reinforcements like they have the past couple of years, where they've had to bring in defensive tackles. That was one of the things with the departure of Chris Bogle, with the departure of Mahmoud Diabate, and with the departure of Tyron Hopper. You got to start replacing those sorts of things. So Pyburn, just from a depth perspective and a balance perspective, is an important addition. I think there's a couple other reasons he's an important addition. One, you mentioned he's from Jacksonville, and you can't,
nice to be doing work in Duval County again.
Absolutely. And when you got guys ranked in the 400s to 500s in Jacksonville, they should be Florida Gators. That is the reality. We sit here again. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think you need 5-star guys to compete big time, but you also need solid depth and talent from Jacksonville that's going to come in. And so bringing in a guy from Jacksonville and making sure that he's a Gator is important. The other thing is that Pyburn clearly has wanted to be a Gator almost his entire life. There were pictures going around of him when he was younger with his dad and that sort of stuff. So again, even if you bring in more talented guys next year and the year after, the expectation is that Pyburn is going to wait his turn, that he's going to work hard, that, you know, that you already mentioned the motor, and that he's going to stick it out for the full 4 years, because this is where he wanted to be. And beyond that, you know, even if you just look at the offer list, I mean, the offer list for Pyburn is pretty significant. It's, you know, there's Auburn on that list. There's Memphis, Minnesota, Arkansas State. But again, other SEC teams that were interested in having him there. And so a good pickup, right? I mean, this isn't somebody that I'm going to expect to come in and contribute next year, though Pyburn was talking about that he wanted to come in and contribute next year. And certainly the fact that Napier looks like he's going to focus on special teams, I think means that some of these guys very early on are going to get an opportunity. The other thing is, you look at his profile, he's a wrestler. So you think about what happened last year where the defense couldn't seem to get off of blocks when LSU was running counters, or really anybody was running counters. And you get a defensive lineman or a linebacker who's used to understanding leverage, understanding how to move somebody around, and understanding how to manipulate that sort of stuff from a wrestling background, I think becomes important. So a big pickup for Florida, right? I mean, you need these guys on the defense for depth. You don't want to constantly be sort of picking up guys who are solid starters or even solid backups in the transfer portal. You'd love to have those guys be guys you develop from high school, where they start out as a solid backup or a special teams contributor and then build into being a starter. And that's kind of the profile that you figure you're going to see with Pyburn. You know, Ivan specifically says he's a Power 5 starter. And so anytime you can pick up a starter, that's a significant pickup.
Hope to see plenty of Jacksonville representation in the next coming class here. Let's get those roots established again up there. Caleb Douglas, Will, from Texas, wide receiver. Napier called him a unique athlete, former quarterback in the footprint of recruiting where the staff was at Louisiana Lafayette, so they were familiar with his profile already. He switched to wide receiver in high school. At one point, he was committed to Southern Cal, which had, wide receivers coach Kerry Colbert, now a Florida Gator wide receivers coach. Colbert was praised by Napier for the recruitment here. Says he did a great job reeling Douglas in, and it looks like a solid athlete coming in here for the Gators. Well,
yeah. So again, I mean, you look at the offer list: Florida, Baylor, LSU, USC, Virginia Tech, Cincinnati, Colorado. That's a major set of schools that are offering him. And again, when we talk about 3 stars, he's 470th nationally. So again, a high 3-star player. Those high 3-star players, you know, there's not a whole lot of difference between guys ranked 300th and guys ranked 500th in terms of the propensity to become NFL players. And you look at some of these guys, I think Jalen Farmer is actually a great example where, you know, 24/7, the composite has him at something like 380 or something like that. But 24/7 itself ranks him like 270 or something like that. And so there are these large spreads once you get into this range where you don't really know what you have. And I think the evaluations make a bigger difference. This was a must have for Florida. They had DJ Allen that they were looking to bring in at receiver. They also, obviously, we're going to talk about some of the guys they missed. They missed Trevante Citizen, their running back, which means that they need a playmaker. But really, you look at the roster. I mean, they get Justin Shorter to come back. You've got Trent Whittemore, who's struggled to stay healthy. You got Jamarcus Weston, who really hasn't contributed all that much. You got Xavier Henderson, who's sort of been solid, but not a game changer. Jaquavian Frazier's, again, not really a whole lot of contribution. Marcus Burke had the one big catch against South Carolina last year, and that was it. Dejon Reynolds didn't play at all. And then you got Caleb Douglas. So this puts their wide receiver room up to 8 guys. I think they probably want to get at least to 9, but probably 10. And so you're looking at a transfer portal. They're going to have to go use the transfer portal to move this forward, but you're not too far away from losing some of these guys, right? I mean, Shorter's going to leave after this year. If Whittemore or Weston have big years, or Frazier's or Henderson have big years, those guys are going to leave. And so you have to start building that in and start building depth here. So Douglas was an absolute must-have, not just because he's talented, not just because he was a quarterback until a couple of years ago and is transitioning to wide receiver, and there's probably a lot more upside, but also because you need depth at this position, or you're going to constantly be trying to fill holes. And I think we'll get to the overall class, but I think that's actually a theme of this transition class specifically.
Defensive lineman from Washington, Andrew Savania. Napier was very excited when he's talking about him at the press conference. He said he's a heck of an outside linebacker and tight end. He said he's going to be an edge player for the defense. Big, tall, long, a lot of growth potential. Again, a lot of these, he talked about the evaluation process, how important it is for this staff. And when you're in the position they are, where you're coming in with 2 months left to go, that evaluation, picking up a guy, and there was a theme here. 6 guys in this class from the state of Florida, Will. They were going all over the country, and Napier did point out that they had the resources to get it done, and they went after guys who they felt like fit their system, that they felt like could grow into something. So a lot of this class built on potential, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of one of the things you want to do when you've got one of these transition classes is you don't have a long time to build up relationships. You have to go sort of with what your evaluations say. And if you you really only have to hit on 2 or 3 guys in this class. And I think that's sort of the crux of what you're looking for out of a transition class. So you have the opportunity to take a few flyers on some guys you think might be stars. And at the end of the day, again, I look at the offer list: Florida, California, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Nevada. Not quite the offer list of those other 2 guys, but 7A is not the exact same recruit, right? 677th overall. So sort of a mid 3-star, not a high 3-star, not a low 3-star, still a very good prospect, but this is kind of in the range of like a Ja'Kai Polite or a Jabari Zuniga. So those guys turned into significant players for Florida, and they ranked right around this same place. So it's not that these guys can't turn into that. It's just that there's a lot more variance, right? It might turn out that he's a complete bust. It might turn out that he turns into Zuniga or Grenard or Polite. And so we'll just have to sort of see, but 6'3", 258 is what he's listed as a prospect info, but I think he's a little bit bigger than that. If you go a little bit further down 24/7, they got him listed at 6'3", 273. I think Pyburn probably profiles as more of that outside linebacker rush end. I think 7A has the opportunity to potentially be more of that defensive end who really sets the edge and builds defensive line depth, which again is an important thing for Florida from a roster perspective. This again goes back to just sort of filling spots that were empty. And if you look at it, the only place over the course of this class that really isn't filled is corner. And even in that case, Devin Moore is probably going to be, he was introduced as a corner. I think there's a guy in the comments who keeps mentioning it to me. He was introduced as a corner. So again, you think about where Florida was lacking in numbers. The places that they're lacking in numbers or have been lacking in numbers are defensive end, linebacker, and wide receiver. And when they add Douglas, Pyburn, and 7A, that addresses those concerns.
Definitely. Hayden Hansen, another signee on Wednesday here from Texas, tight end, 6'5", 250. Napier lit up talking about Hansen at the press conference. Said he blew him away when he did private workouts for them at Louisiana. He said he doesn't have many opportunities, but he doesn't have the opportunities he should. He said his film wasn't great as a junior because he shifted halfway through the season, 4 games into the season from quarterback to tight end, ran a 4.71 for them at Louisiana. Big man with hands, and his ceiling is really high. So Napier said he also called it one of the better evaluations in the class. So this is a guy, Napier just feels like this guy's a hidden gem, didn't get a lot of attention because of a late position change in high school. And that tight end room, Will, you talk about the receiver room maybe being a little light with injury. If injuries were to happen, there might be some opportunities for that tight end room to step up this year.
Yeah, they do have an awful lot of tight ends now on the roster. When you start
a lot of unproven tight ends too.
Yeah, but you figure they got Livingston that they brought in, who was listed as an offensive tackle, but they're talking about having him at tight end. You've got Hansen, then you got Gage Wilcox and Nick Elsness from last class. You've got Jonathan Odom from the class before, and then Keon Zipper from the class before that. That's actually more tight ends than you probably want to carry. So I'm going to suspect that 1 or 2 of those guys is probably going to try to find someplace elsewhere through the transfer portal. You think about the thing about Hansen is that he does fit the profile of what it looks like Napier's looking for. When you think about guys like David Connor at offensive tackle, or a guy like Cameron Waits, who he brings in at offensive tackle, or a guy like Tony Livingston that he brings in at tight end, he's looking for guys with high level athleticism. And a lot of times what that means is you see wrestling or you see basketball specifically in their background. And again, Hansen, 6'5", also plays basketball, is listed there. He also punted during his junior season. So he's got some athletic ability. And I think that's what Napier's seeing. again, this is one of those guys who moved, right? The same thing they said about, it was something that he said about Max Brown, is Max Brown's only spent a couple of years at quarterback, which may explain some of the limitations I saw when I looked at Max Brown on film a couple of weeks ago. Look, this is actually one that I think we can then, so coaches talk about trust our evaluations, right? And then you sit there and you go, okay, well, can we trust your evaluations? Is that really true? Hansen's a great case study for Napier, right? Because you look at his offer list and it's UTSA, it's Louisiana, it's Colorado, it's New Mexico, a significant step down from the offers that these other guys that we've been talking about got. It doesn't mean he's not a good player, but it means that from an evaluation standpoint, the big boys have decided he's not a big boy Power 5 player. And Napier is saying that he is. And so that's the question, right? Is he a big boy Power 5 player, and can he contribute? Now, one place he can contribute right away is he's a 6'5" basketball player. Stick him back there on kick blocks, right? I mean, put him back there and have him try to block field goals and just use his athleticism to get to that point. Obviously, you don't want to sign and use a scholarship just on a guy to block kicks, but in terms of where he can contribute early, where that athleticism starts to make a difference, guys like Livingston, guys like Hansen, it is a little bit exciting to think about having tight ends who have that kind of athletic ability, but we'll see if the athletic ability can convert into the actual football ability on the field, because that's not something that we've seen thus far.
You mentioned all this fresh talent for special teams. Special teams wasn't much of a factor in last season, was it? We didn't really have many problems there, did we? So,
no, not at all. Never cost us a game at all.
It's a nightmare. We definitely could use some fresh talent. All right, let's move on to 4 bits here. Talk about the misses in the class. Only 6 players from the state of Florida. Mentioned that. Napier called that a product of circumstance. Said they had to evaluate the best players where they're available, and he said, luckily, we're at the University of Florida. We have the resources to go and get that accomplished if they're somewhere else. Said that Florida brand is strong. It's spread out and able to do good work. Our approach is going to be inside out from the state. So they want to work in Florida, work their way out. So going forward, they do want to work out of their backyard more often. Product of circumstance being that relatively new coaching staff here, just trying to get that who they want in the door before signing day here. But Will, we talked about it on last week's 4 bits last week too. Linebacker Harold Perkins, the number 4 overall player in 24/7 Sports, out of Houston, Texas, chooses LSU over Florida and NIL and A&M. So we can start calling them after Jimbo's rant there. He's going to attach that NIL stigma to them even more if he keeps going off like that. So
I'm telling you, sliced bread is a reliable source. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I hear it's used for comparisons all the time. It's the coolest thing since, it's, you got, I don't know. Said he had to stop for a second. After Perkins, I actually had to stop for a second. I got the news while I was driving, and I was at a red light, and I got a notification that he picked LSU, and I was actually disappointed. I was actually in the moment disappointed. I really expected this one to turn, and I feel like a lot of people were kind of feeling that disappointment yesterday. I was listening to a podcast later. He's originally from New Orleans, apparently, has a lot of relatives out there still. And you got to think, New Orleans about 3 hours away, a little over 3 hours away from the Houston area, a little bit easier for family to get to, I suppose. So, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense if you're looking to stay closer to home there. But, man, I really felt like we had picked up the momentum and closed the gap there, Will. So I was a little bummed out missing out on this one.
I mean, I think it's okay to be disappointed to miss these guys, right? The expectation is that at Florida, you're going to be able to compete for these guys. Napier was able to get into the competition, obviously, but wasn't able to completely close the deal. And that's disappointing, but also, I think, to your point, not necessarily unexpected. I think until about a month ago, Harold Perkins was not even on the radar of most Florida fans. At the same time, Napier was able to bring him into the radar, and that's the first step, right? So you bring him into the radar, and then you sort of push forward. And the hope is that the thing is that you need a couple, 2, 3, 4 guys from this class to really turn into solid starters and all SEC players. And Perkins was almost a guarantee to do that. Barring injury, he was a guaranteed, hey, we got that guy who's going to be a significant contributor for the next 3 years. And he's filling a position of need at linebacker. And it changes it answers some perception questions about Napier and his recruiting ability, where we all presume he's going to be a great recruiter. But we think he'll be a good recruiter, but he hasn't proven that yet, at least not at the large scale that we need to compete with Georgia and Alabama. And a guy like Perkins would have been a major step towards proving that is true and that's what we can expect moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, look, I don't think you evaluate any class based on one player. I think that's a bad process. And I don't think you evaluate a program based on one recruiting class either. That's a bad process. You want to make sure the processes that you have in place to bring players in, but also the process that you're taking as a fan to evaluate those classes or those players that are coming in are multifaceted, that it's not just one variable. So Harold Perkins coming would not have made this class bulletproof, and Harold Perkins not coming doesn't mean that the whole class falls apart. But yeah, when you miss out on a guy who's a top 10 player in the country, you should be disappointed. That's the whole point, right? I mean,
disappointment stems from expectation, though. And that's the positive of Billy Napier's. I expected that we were going to get the guy, and that hasn't been the case the last few years.
Well, I'm not sure the previous Florida staff would have called Perkins.
Not sure they did.
That's what they did with ETN, right? I mean, he's like, I couldn't find the phone number. So, look, I think
352.
Look, I think Napier did what he could to bring in Perkins. Obviously, we've got name, image, and likeness, which is a whole different ball game that comes into play as well in terms of Texas A&M and LSU and all the other SEC teams and where Florida sits there. We don't necessarily know, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You got to get the job done, right? It doesn't matter that you came in second for Harold Perkins the next time you play LSU. What matters is Harold Perkins is going to be terrorizing your quarterback from the backside as a rushing linebacker. And so you're going to have to deal with that. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world, but it's obviously not ideal. You'd love to have him on your squad. And the idea that we shouldn't be disappointed, or the idea that, well, it's okay. It's like, no, you got to start winning these. And, Napier won a couple of them on early signing day, and he didn't win a couple of them on national signing day. And, I think that's sort of what our expectations would have been for the entire cycle. And, but the reality is Perkins would have really been a cherry on top, where we would have said, okay, we really got something here. And so, yeah, missing that one hurts a little bit.
Well, we know Perkins is going to be running fast to keep Brian Kelly off of his backside too. So that's something to keep. I love that guy. That guy committed to Alabama over that guy in the video committed to Alabama. I love it.
I mean, I would have been so ticked off at that video if I was a recruit. I would have been like, I'm going to Rutgers. Like, screw you, Brian Kelly. I'm going to Rutgers.
Someone just said, make the wheel bigger. Just make the wheel bigger. So it's not a problem. The camera also goes in a circle. You can be back to back too. That's another, I don't know, but whatever. Safety Jacoby Matthews out of Ponchatoula, Louisiana. Another guy that we were in on, felt like we had a good shot at. NIL A&M over Florida and LSU is going out west to become an Aggie. This Texas A&M class, I think they have, what do they have, Will? Was it 7 of the top 100 players in this class that Jimbo's built?
Yeah, so they have, hold on a second. They have 10 guys in the top 60. and then another 10 in the top 200. So they got 20 guys in the top 200.
Well, I wonder if that's going to be repeated for a while. I think that's going to be a minute before that's repeated, because I think you got some of these classes have been built up with, Bama and Georgia, because schools like, Florida's been down in terms of recruiting. Miami hasn't been like, I think with Napier getting into Florida and Mario getting into Miami, I think that the ability to go in and pluck a kid out of Miami like they did, they beat that Miami out for that kid Stewart, that's going to be tough to do for A&M going forward.
Yeah, we'll see.
School.
I mean,
Clemson,
there is
Bama, Georgia.
There is such a differentiation between A&M, Alabama, and Georgia and everyone else that it's pretty ridiculous when you look at it. And the fact that the SEC is 1, 2, 3 in the national rankings is not an accident, but also, again, I mean, like I said, 10 guys in the top 60 for A&M, but 9 for Alabama. 10 guys in the top 200, another 10 guys. So between 61 and 200, another 10 guys for Texas A&M and 10 guys for Alabama as well. So,
so A&M has a historic class, and it basically means they're just keeping pace with Alabama now.
Yeah. The place where Alabama did worse than Texas A&M is in guys ranked 200 to 600. If Alabama had signed 29 guys like Texas A&M had, they would have had a higher point total.
Oh, poor Jimbo. Running back Trevante Citizen picks up. He ends up picking Miami over Florida and LSU. Leaves the Bayou for the Sunshine State, but it's going to be driving past Gainesville on the way down to the U. Again, I'm a believer in. I've seen enough of the Oregon games the last couple of years where I have some questions about Mario Cristobal on game day. I'm not sure he's the best game day coach, but there's zero question in my mind that guy's going to build the U into a recruiting machine. And I mean, even Florida being in on this late just shows the type of work that Napier and Cristobal are doing. So Miami's going to be one of those teams we're battling down to the wire. I'm expecting a lot of recruiting battles with them in the next couple of years here.
Yeah, I mean, you hope so. I mean, look, I think it's good if the state of Florida has good programs. The fact that Florida State, and Miami have all been down means all these other guys get to come in and raid the state. Now, obviously, we want Florida to be a juggernaut when it comes to all that stuff themselves, right? I mean, we want them to be part of the bully in the state. But just having it, having a Miami and having a Florida State be good means that Florida State game or the Florida State Miami game, or even when Florida plays Miami, that means something. Right now, like the biggest rivalry is just the nippy guys at Central Florida who keep pretending like they can actually compete with us when we care about a game. And at the end of the day, what's that?
Don't call it a rivalry. Don't do that.
I'm not.
There's no rivalry.
It's a better rivalry than
don't
Florida
say that
State
word.
right
Stop saying
now.
that word. Stop saying that. I was talking to my buddy the other day. He's a big Miami fan, and
that's shit.
I was saying that. Yeah, no, I tell him that all the time. But we were talking about where Florida State's like. If you go back on the timeline here this fall, and you like put it the date at maybe like beginning of November, FSU beats Miami. They're kind of starting to get on a roll after that rough start, just as Florida's imploding and there's rumors of Manny Diaz being out. And you got the number one recruit in the country coming into Tallahassee. You win 5 of 6 leading up to that Florida game. Florida State's looking pretty good at that point. And they're probably feeling like, hey, if Mullen stays, he's a lame duck. And if Manny stays, he's a lame duck. Norvell's got a chance with his bump class, got the number one recruit coming in. And then everything since that loss to Florida has just been a total disaster. And it looks like they're going to be I mean, the momentum with Napier and Cristobal, I don't see how Florida State's going to catch up for a few years. It's going to be a long couple of years in Tallahassee, I have a feeling.
Look, I mean, we've been talking about recruiters recruit for a long time, and Norvell has not proven an ability to do that. He's basically sat there in the low 20s or high 20s, I guess, for 3 straight years now. And, 23rd, 22nd, and 21st or 20th or something like that. Like, that ain't getting the job done, even in the ACC. Right. You're going to get whipped in the ACC even at that level. Now, if you get to like 10th in the ACC, okay, well, that puts you at a place where you can start to compete. But, obviously there's some extenuating circumstances, right? I mean, you've got the 5-star player who decides to go to the historically Black college and university, and some of that is tied to NIL, I'm sure. It's also tied to Deion Sanders. I mean, there's a big draw to go play for primetime somewhere, right?
Florida State's next coach.
Well, maybe. So he'll come back to Florida State when Deion takes that job. But the other thing is that Florida State historically has been a little bit. They have always been running right on the red-black barrier, right? Profit and loss statements in Tallahassee have always been right there on the line. And part of the reason for that is that the booster support for Florida State is less than it is for other places, specifically Florida. Florida almost always runs at a profit for their overall athletic department and for the football program specifically, which means that when you make a change from Jim McElwain to Dan Mullen, or when you make a change from Dan Mullen to Billy Napier, you're not killing your finances when you do that, and you're not having to go get your boosters to pony up to get that coach to, for the buyout for that coach. I'm not sure how much money there is available in the NIL for those guys, but Yeah, it's rough. But getting back to Citizen, or getting back to the guys that we missed, I think Citizen obviously was somebody that until about a day before, I don't think any of us really thought we had a shot at. So it was funny to sort of see how it ramped up real quick to, hey, we might really get this guy, to, oh no, he went to Miami, and that Miami was not even the one that we really thought he was probably going to end up at. I think most people thought he was going to end up at LSU. He must have seen the Brian Kelly video as well and decided to go someplace else. And then Jacoby Matthews, sort of the same type of thing, right? I mean, I think the thought process was that he might end up at LSU, but not necessarily Texas A&M. But sliced bread strikes again, and Matthews is at Texas A&M, and this, I think, is part and parcel to everything that we believe about recruiting is that the 6 players in the state of Florida sort of play into this. You're trying to bring guys from Texas. You're trying to bring guys from Louisiana. It just so happens Napier is from that area, so he has relationships with these guys and he knows those guys. But part of it is those are the guys who are available, right? The guys in the state of Florida had already been zapped up. And in fact, if you think about where Napier was successful in this class, and we'll get to that in a second, if you think about where he was successful, the state of Florida is actually a place where he was successful given who was available.
Well, when you look at Louisiana too, might be a unique year too, where LSU, there was some uncertainty and a turnover in a coaching staff too. So the fact is, a couple of those guys out of Louisiana, late Matthews, Citizen, you got a shot at some of these guys that maybe most years get locked up when LSU is a little more stable. That's another thing to think about. I think it's funny too, going back to that NIL topic real quick, Will. Sanders was really defensive about that topic when a lot of people were talking about that with Travis Hunter going there, about there was the Barstool connection. He was no, it had nothing to do with that. And then Jimbo's also defensive. Why are we so defensive about NIL in an era where NIL is okay and everything's fine? I don't understand. Nobody's saying this 10 years ago that you pay, like, why? I don't understand. There's not really hard and fast rules, which Napier even talked about. And we've talked about where this is a little bit of the Wild West right now. And you're looking at a situation that 5 years from now could be radically different. However, in the moment, there's no real breaking of the rules because there aren't many rules attached to this thing. And it's different. It's not even the same across different state lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that some of the reporting, I'm sure, is inaccurate in terms of the total dollar amounts and those sorts of things.
Don't question sliced bread.
Well, the other thing is that, it turns out that, shockingly, Jimbo Fisher has a giant ego. And so when you tell him that it's boosters who are the reason that he's bringing in 47 5-star guys, he goes, well, no, it's because I'm selling the education at Texas A&M. Have you ever been to the stadium? This is one of the best stadiums in the country.
It's the finest university in the land.
And we have an awesome coaching staff here who's making sure we take care of these players and get them to where they need to be. Like, all of those things may be true, but let's be honest, the jump was significant. And there's significant oil money there in Texas that likely might have been able to make a difference. I think the defensiveness, though, is all ego, right? It's all sitting there and saying, look, I did this. It wasn't the money. I made a sales pitch. And at the end of the day, maybe that's true. But I also think that, and this is one of the things with Kelly that's going to be interesting to see as well, is these guys are born salesmen, right? I mean, and you can see it. Like, Fisher's sitting there with a straight face, acting all indignant, like the NIL had nothing to do with this. And you're just like, that guy needs to be a politician because he has zero problem lying. And it doesn't even, and it looks like he's convinced himself it's not even a lie. And so you're sitting there going, okay, well, 2 years from now, these guys who are sitting there on the bench, who aren't going to make it to the NFL, these guys are going to be primetime candidates in the transfer portal. It'll be really interesting to me to see what happens next year and the year after with some of these guys, because not everybody's going to be able to get playing time right away. I mean, A&M was a pretty good team last year, and now you've brought in 20 top 200 guys. Those 20 guys can't play. So what's going to happen when they sit on the bench, and what do they decide to do? And is the sales pitch that Jimbo Fisher sold good enough to keep them there? Or was the sales pitch tied into money? We're going to know, because if there's a mass exodus from a transfer portal perspective, that'll say something about his sales abilities.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point about the ego there. T-shirt idea for the road trip to A&M this year. Front side, Texas A&M recruiting, the best thing since sliced bread. Backside, scared money don't make money. There you go. Great T-shirt for the Florida road game at Texas A&M this year. Let's move on here. Let's move on to 6-bits. Will, overall thoughts on the class? The Gators finished National Signing Day 2022 with 17 signees, good enough for number 19 overall in the 24/7 sports team rankings. We talked about guys like Max Brown coming on late, helping to build that class up. Of course, you have, Kamari Wilson, the star of this class at IMG, the 5-star safety. Chris McClellan will be forever remembered committing to no coach in particular, but saying that Florida's not going to hire some bum. Devin Moore coming in, Shamar James, a lot of good recoveries here. Trevor Etienne. So we talked about being disappointed by some of these misses, but the fact that we rebounded and were able to cut ties with some guys who have been committed for a long time that Napier did not identify as a part of his plan, and rebound and get some of these guys late. I think there was a heck of an effort by the staff. And as a fan, definitely proud of the effort. Shows that we're going to be in the hunt for some real top guys in this 2023 class. But it's a transition class. This is not going to be a program-defining class. And I think that the best thing you hope for is some key contributors out of this class here in the next couple of years. But beyond that, this is not going to be the 2006 Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin program-defining type of class.
No, and if that was your expectation, then your expectations were off. I think we can be honest and say this is one of the weaker classes that Florida's had in the past few years. It's stronger than Jim McElwain's 2015 class, but it's weaker than Dan Mullen's 2018 class. And it's also weaker than Will Muschamp's 2011 class.
Bolstered by the transfer portal, unlike McElwain and Muschamp. They didn't have that option.
But the other thing that I would say is that Mullen had one of the stronger transition classes. In fact, after his transition class, I really sort of looked at it and said, all right, we're on the right track because he's matching what Urban Meyer did in his transition class. And it turns out that doesn't actually mean very much, right? that transition class seems to be what the previous coaches left you with, and then who you're able to convince based on who's left over. And so, Mullen was able to convince Kyle Pitts to come. Well, Kyle Pitts had already committed. Same thing with Damian Pierce. Same thing with Trey Dean. Same thing with Amari Burney. The guys who really he convinced to come were Emory Jones and then Jacob Copeland. He had decommitted. He got him to recommit. And then Justin Watkins, who wound up not really playing for Florida because of legal difficulties. So the interesting thing is when you go and look at anybody's transition class, you're inevitably underwhelmed at the number of players who end up being significant contributors. Like if you look at Urban Meyer's 2005 class, you got Ryan Stamper, David Nelson, Dorian Monroe, though he wasn't a major contributor. You got Lewis Murphy. You got Keaston Moore, who played at running back, but obviously they had to bring in guys because Moore wasn't necessarily good enough for what they were trying to do. And then you got Jonathan Phillips at kicker, right? That's what you get out of that transition class that year. You go to the 2011 class for Will Muschamp. Okay, Jeff Driscoll, he played quite a bit. Marcus Roberson at corner, he played. Jacoby Brissett, he transferred out, so he went to the NFL. But I don't think you can give that to Florida. I don't think you can give that to Florida. Valdez Showers and Lucius Purifoy, Trip Thurman, Deontay Sanders, Clay Burton. So, again, nobody here who's a huge game changer. You go to the 2015 class for you got Martez Ivy and CeCe Jefferson for 5 stars. Not really. I mean, neither one of those guys got drafted. You go to Jordan Scarlett and Antonio Callaway. Those are probably the 2 stars from that 15 class. Tyler Jordan played some on the offensive line. Jabari Zuniga at defensive end, sort of in that spot we talked about earlier. And then that's pretty much it. As you get, Fred Johnson and Nick Buchanan way down at the bottom. That's really all you see there. And then we've talked about significant. We've talked a lot about Mullen's transition class, where you got Copeland, Garage, Emory Jones, and Kyle Pitts. You get contributions from Amari Burney and Trey Dean. You get Damian Pierce, who apparently is the best running back and best running back prospect in the NFL draft, even though Florida didn't know that. And then there's nobody else from that class who really contributed until you get down to Evan McPherson at kicker. So, what am I looking for from this 2022 class? I think you need 4 starters and 2 all SEC guys. And if you do that, you've exceeded expectations, right? So if Kamari Wilson comes in and he's a starter right away, if Chris McClellan comes in, he's a starter right away. If Shamar James comes in, he's a starter right away. And if Trevor Etienne comes in and is a starter right away, this is a successful class, regardless of what all of these guys we've talked about with potential and high upside and all that sort of stuff. But then you start saying, okay, well, if Tony Livingston, who's a big time basketball player, can turn into a star, what does that mean? If Caleb Douglas can turn into a star, if Jack Pyburn can turn into a star, if David Connor can turn into a solid offensive tackle, if Max Brown gives them meaningful snaps at quarterback, if Hayden Hansen makes a big difference on special teams, and then if Trey Smack means that we don't have to keep missing kicks and hope that we go for 2 even when we get a touchdown, all of those things can be solid contributions. Obviously, that's looking and projecting into the future. But my point is that you need the 2 all SEC guys. You need another starter or 2. That's all you should expect from this class. There's going to be attrition. There's going to be guys who don't pan out. And the question then is, are Napier's evaluations good enough to a place where guys like Hansen and Brown and Williams and Connor and Miguel Mitchell and Jalen Farmer, that those guys turn into more that you get more out of those guys than a traditional transition class? And I don't know whether he's going to be able to do that, but I don't think you should criticize the back end of the class for a transition class, because I think what you're trying to do is hit on those 1 or 2 starters. You're not just looking to build depth.
Hey, the Louisiana trio in the transfer portal I'm fired up about. I think Jack Miller brings good depth to this position. Well, more than likely, I mean, after what we saw from Richardson this year, got to think there's a decent chance that Miller starts a game if Richardson's still as injury prone as he was last year. But I think I'm most excited about Trey Smack. Well, let's get the field goal game back. Let's be able to kick a field goal again. This team is more than likely, if they're going to win, if they're going to have a chance to win break that 9 to 10 win threshold, they're probably going to have to win some close games, and they need a solid kicker. So let's hope Trey Smack pans out immediately for this ball club.
I'll take it, man. A guy who can kick consistently, and I'm not scared every time he goes onto the field, that'd be great. Because, last year was the first time since Eddie Pinheiro came to campus that I remembered what it was like to have a kicker. Like growing up, Notre Dame never had a kicker. I grew up in Indiana. Notre Dame, and I hated Notre Dame. Notre Dame never had a kicker.
All the big schools barely had kickers back then.
Yeah, like you sit there and you're like, oh, Northwestern is driving for a field goal. Well, they better get to the 6 because otherwise they're not going to make it. And, that doesn't happen anymore. And so the kicker's a weapon. The kicker's a weapon. And when you look at the sites that rate kickers, Smack is rated pretty high in comparison to his contemporary. So, look, I'm not going to say this is a class that's going to compete with Alabama, Georgia, and Texas A&M. Florida fell further behind Texas A&M, Alabama, and Georgia for this class. But that's the sacrifice you make when you make the decision to switch from Dan Mullen to Billy Napier. And yes, the overall ranking for this class is at 88.64, which is behind where Dan Mullen has historically been, but not by that much. So Mullen's been right around 90, whether it's 90.3 or 90.5 in terms of average player ranking. Napier's 88.6 in this transition class. That's behind where Mullen's first class was. But Mullen's first class, second class, third class, and fourth class were all the same rating. And that's the thing we have to see from Napier is it's not that 88.64 is a starting point and it's a problem. It's that 88.64 can't be what we get next year. It needs to be 92 next year. Then the year after it needs to be 94. And you got to start moving that up over time. And I think he's going to have an opportunity to do that for a lot of different reasons. One of which is the state of Florida is loaded next year. And so if Napier does what he's supposed to do, and if he builds that wall around the state or the circle around Gainesville, and says, I'm not letting anybody out of this circle not come to Florida. Florida's going to have a loaded class just because of who lives in the state next year. And so he's going to have an opportunity to prove it. He came into the program asking for all of these resources. It's obviously taken him a little while to put the staff together and get everything sort of humming the way he wants. Now he's got a full year to build relationships, and we'll see what he can do in 2023, because there are no excuses for 2023 at this point. The state is loaded. He's got all the resources he wants. The new football facility's coming on. They got that facility for the players that looks like a Vegas casino with the pool on the rooftop and all that sort of stuff. No more excuses. Time to get the job done.
Let's move on to a dollar here. And you started in on it, but the overall thoughts on Billy Napier so far. And Napier said this in the presser regarding his thoughts on the efforts of the staff. So far, so good. I concur. I think that this staff made a heck of an effort in just 60 days ago from today. Well, Billy Napier is officially hired at Florida. And if you stop and ask yourself, what were my thoughts on that hashtag chosen few? That was a little too ironic of a nickname for the 22 recruiting class there. 75 days ago. So 60 days ago, Napier's hired. 75 days ago, what were my thoughts about the program? What were my thoughts about the chances of having a halfway decent recruiting class this year? I don't think you would have had a lot of optimism heading into a situation where you're about to find a new coach and figure it out. But Napier said it best too in his presser. He said, hopefully we won't be doing this much business in February next year. We're still I think this is a big deal with this staff that they had to recover immense ground that they'll have a whole year to build right now. They're already working on 2023. This is not going to be a problem a year from today. That whole transition, hiring people, dealing with the early signing day, being able to pick up a 5-star kid in the early signing day when we've only signed 2 5-star kids during the entire Dan Mullen era, from IMG nonetheless, was absolutely incredible. Great effort by Napier and his staff, a lot of positive feedback, even from the guys who didn't end up choosing Florida. A lot of positive feedback on the communication from the staff and everything else. We're still in our honeymoon phase with Napier, but it's like you said, the heat is on now. It's now officially, now that this 22 class is mostly behind us. I know we're probably going to add another guy or two, Napier's saying here. I'm sure we're going to pick up another transfer portal. Sure, we're going to lose some guys in the transfer portal. College football, it's year round now. It's not just during certain periods. It's gonna keep evolving before the regular season here. But I would say this is a good demarcation point for where the honeymoon phase is kind of coming to a slow end and the clock is officially started. And we're going to be looking at that 2023 class. You said this in your most recent article, Will, and I love this quote. I want to share this with everyone, that Urban Meyer's first class at Florida was number 12 in the country, which was good enough for number 3 in the SEC. But number 3 in the SEC this past year would have been number 3 in the country. And that's the expectation for Billy Napier as we kick off the 2023 recruiting cycle. That's a lot of pressure, Will. Top 3 in the country.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's why I take the job, though.
So why not? Right? Like, I look at it and I say, Florida has all the resources in the world. Napier has been able to come in and negotiate exactly what he says he needed to build the program, right? He is hiring game changer coordinators and VPs of quality control. And, he's got so many staff names that nobody can even keep track of them at this point. He's obviously got some people who are very, very highly thought of from the Georgia juggernaut in, bringing in Katie Turner and then bringing in Bree Wade, people that he knows, but certainly people who know these big time programs. Napier himself knows the big time program because he was at Alabama there and saw the recruiting machine that Nick Saban had set up. And so he understands what it takes to build this program. And the idea that he's young, or the idea that this is his first big time program or first big time thing and that it's going to take time, it's not the way it works, right? I mean, Kirby Smart comes in, and yes, Mark Richt had a better recruiting profile than Dan Mullen did, but not that much better. And Kirby Smart, all of it, turned them into a juggernaut overnight recruiting wise. And that's why Georgia won the national championship this past year, is because of that profile. Nick Saban came into Alabama, again, turned them into a recruiting juggernaut. And all of a sudden they're winning all these national championships. Now, if we want to be Auburn East, then okay, Napier doesn't need top 3 classes. He doesn't. You can be Auburn East. You can have, 8, 9, 10, get a top 5 every once in a while. And every once in a while, you'll pick off Georgia and get to the SEC championship game. But Auburn won the SEC championship because when they picked off Alabama, they got to go play Missouri in the SEC championship game because the East was so bad. And that isn't going to happen anymore, right? When Auburn beats Alabama, they're going to be facing Georgia or hopefully Florida coming from the East. And it's going to be a tough game. And the East might actually win its fair share of those games because of the way the recruiting's picked up. So, Auburn
gets a double dose of Georgia and Alabama every year in the regular season too.
Well, and don't forget, they're now going to have to face Texas A&M too every year, right? So the days of Auburn being able to float by at 7, 8, and 9 may not exist anymore. Those days may have passed us by. I guess if I'm evaluating Napier 60 days in, there's a couple of things. One is that I don't think he worked magic with this recruiting class. In fact, I wrote back in December 9th, I wrote that they were currently 77th nationally, and their average player rating was 87.65. So the Gators were 25th overall in average player ranking. Now, if they get Arliss Boardingham, who's still sort of trying to decide between Oregon and Florida, they'll probably jump up to about 16th, which means that he's improved the quality of player that he had once he sort of, decided who from the Mullen class he was going to take and who had decommitted and all that sort of stuff. But the fact that they were 77th nationally was purely a matter of volume, not a matter of player quality. So the idea that, they were really 25th when he took over, and he has them up to 19th. So I don't know that he's made that giant jump there. I think he's made some significant progress. I think breaking the IMG curse is a big deal. I think getting a guy like Devin Moore, who's from Naples, so a guy who's from Florida, and even getting a guy like Jack Pyburn, like we talked about, from Florida is a big deal. But I'm not willing to crown him on necessarily on improving this recruiting class from 77th to 20th. Like that to me isn't all that impressive. I feel like he was at 25th when he took over, and now he's at 19th. If he gets to 16th, okay, now we can start talking about it. But the thing I think that has impressed me most about Napier thus far has been very much the one day at a time, one person at a time. And that's the thing that's going to take time for us to really evaluate. Right. All the folks from Louisiana were extraordinarily thrilled for Billy Napier when he got this opportunity until he started raiding Louisiana. And then they got a little bit bitter. But
Aging Cajuns.
But the genuineness of Napier is the thing that kept coming up when he was hired, when he was being interviewed. Some people I talked to within the Florida program who had talked to Napier before he was even a candidate. That was the commentary that I heard, was he's a really genuine person that, you sit in a room with him and you believe what he's telling you and all those sorts of things. And that isn't going to pay off in a transition class, right? Where you're trying to get some guy who lives in Washington State to come and play at Florida. At that point, you're flying all over the place. You're trying to cram everything in at one time, and you're not necessarily going to be able you're not going to be able to utilize the skills that you have and that sort of differentiation that you have when you do that. And that's, I think, why we look at the 2023 class, because that 2023 class, you absolutely have the opportunity to do that. And, Napier in his press conference the other day mentioned that, you sort of schedule for the 2022 guys, and then you schedule the 2023 guys who are in the area around that in these last couple of months. But that's not really true in terms of prioritizing the 2022 class, because he clearly has prioritized going to high schools in Florida. And so if I'm evaluating the process, one of the things I really, really like about Billy Napier's process thus far is that there are all sorts of Twitter and Instagram photos of him out there with high school coaches in the state of Florida. And so, and even guys at small high schools in the state of Florida. And I think that's a big deal, because Napier probably is never going to recruit a guy from one of those schools that's very small. Maybe one of these small schools ends up with a stud and he's able to go get that guy. But you know what? The guy who's the small high school coach, or the coach at a high school that's small in Florida, eventually is going to get a job where he no longer is at a small school, where he's at a job where there's a bunch of recruits. And he's going to remember that Billy Napier came and saw him when he was at one of those small schools that a lot of the Power Five guys think is insignificant. And so the fact that he has endeared himself to the community. There was something where he went to a coaches conference for high school coaches, and there were a bunch of pictures floating around. And in fact, I think Gator Dave tweeted something about it, and the guy who ran the thing said, yeah, we invited Dan Mullen every year. He never came. And so those sorts of process things, that one day at a time, one person at a time, those are the things I'm hanging my hat on. Like, I can look at the statistics for the recruiting and I go, I don't know, right? There's still a lot of open questions. It's not that I'm sitting here going, oh my God, the sky's falling, Napier can't recruit. It's that he hasn't put anything down on paper statistically that makes me go, oh yeah, he's definitely going to be able to compete with Kirby Smart and Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. But I think the relationship aspect of it, I'm seeing that in terms of the process, in terms of setting everything up. And so when you look at the first 60 days, if you told me that after 60 days, Florida's recruiting class would be meh on the transition side, but that Florida would have really strong relationships building with high school coaches in the state, I absolutely would have taken that over a couple of extra players in this 2022 class.
You got to keep in mind too, lot of top tier competition. If you're talking about getting into one of those top three spots, you got to break in with A&M, Alabama, and Georgia, which obviously we hold ourselves to that standard. We expect to be there. Is it realistic to expect Napier to break into that right away? Because even Jimbo, this is really the first year he's been in the top 5 a little bit, but he hasn't jumped ahead of Bama and Georgia until is he going to do his 5th year out in College Station? So it took him some time before he really got ahead of them on the trail in terms of this class. But it's like you said, that's due to some technicalities. They brought in more players at A&M than they did at Alabama. But you also see Sarkisian at Texas has picking up momentum. Ohio State is still a beast. Freeman at Notre Dame. Oklahoma is going to be tough there with Venables still. LSU is going to pick it up with Kelly. I think they're going to stay right. They're going to be just as strong as ever. And Mario picking up Miami. I think there's going to be a lot of competition, obviously, for that top 5 spot. This is not like this no easy task ahead of Billy Napier here, and finishing in the top 5 next year would be absolutely a fantastic way to start that bump class, Will.
Well, look, I mean, I think there's a series of historical things that he has to hit. He needs almost 3 5-stars. I think it's like 2.75 stars that most guys from 2005 SEC championship coaches have hit. They usually increase their class by 10 or 15 spots. They end up like 2nd in the conference. There are a bunch of different benchmarks you can think of. The problem is most of those benchmarks now mean you got to be 2nd in the country if you're going to achieve them. Look, here's the deal. If Napier comes out with a top 5 class, I'm not going to kill him for that, right? I mean, I think top 3s are going to be necessary over the long haul, but I'm not going to kill him for being top 5. Obviously, that's an improvement and a significant improvement, and you're sitting there and Florida's going to be able to compete. But one of the things I think we need to be cognizant of is that it's not okay and I never quite understand this. It's not okay on the field to just finish top 10 every year and never make the playoff. Right. In fact, if that was okay, no one would have been grumbling about Dan Mullen. Even this year, we would have said, well, hell, he's been a top 10 guy for 3 straight years. How can we get rid of him? But the reason that he was jettisoned, one, was sort of, just culture and attitude and all the stuff that Scott Strickland talked about that was beneath the surface, but also that that's not the standard that yes, we want top 10 finishes. We want that sort of consistency, but you got to get a 2 or a 3 every once in a while. And I don't understand why that's not the same expectation on the recruiting trail. Yes, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to beat Miami. You're going to have to beat Alabama. You're going to have to beat Georgia. You're going to have to beat Texas A&M. But my expectation is that the program wants to do that on the field, and that it's not acceptable if you never beat any of those teams over the next 5 years on the field. So why is it acceptable to never beat those teams on the recruiting trail? Do you have disadvantages? Are you trying to play catch up? All those things might be true.
I'm trying to set expectations, though, in terms of because I see this across a lot of the Gator community. We're all saying, hey, do what you can with 2022. 2023, though, that's time to deliver. Clock's ticking now, right? I even said so myself. Realistically, to get into that top 3 group is going to take a real deal class. Is that going to take a few years to build up that reputation before you're able to crack into that, though?
No, he has to have 6 all SEC players in next year's class. Like when the smoke settles and you look at that class, there have to be 6 guys who've played at all SEC level. Otherwise, we're going to have the same problem that we had with Mullen. Because when you look at Mullen, the 2019 class is exactly why Dan Mullen didn't survive. Because you look at it, the only guy who played at an all SEC level at any capacity at all was Kyer Elam. And Elam was not an all SEC player, right? Now, part of it was because he was injured this year and some other things, but that's part of the reason why you need big time recruiting is because the big time recruiting helps you. So that class was ranked 9th in the country. It was ranked 5th in the SEC. Right. So you'd sit there and say, oh, well, that's a great class in terms of, hey, it's top 10. Why are you complaining? Well, here's why I'm complaining. Chris Steele never played a game. Kyer Elam, good player. Chris Bogle, backup. Tyron Hopper couldn't get on the field until this year. Keon Zipper, hasn't really contributed a ton. Diabate already transferred, contributed a lot, but already transferred. And certainly I don't think was a game changer when he's on the field. Lloyd Summerall hasn't done very much. Naquan Wright, third down back. Jalen Humphreys, haven't seen very much. Tarquin, tackle, so backup tackle. Jalen Jones transferred before the spring was over. Jadon Hill injured, but has played pretty well when he's been out there. I actually like him. William Herod, Chester Kimbrough, playing really well for Michigan State, unfortunately. You got Deontay Marks. You got Riley Simons, hasn't played very much. Jamarcus Weston, Kingsley Equican, Josiah Pierre never played a game. Then you got Trent Whittemore and Ethan White. So you look at that and go, okay, who from that class is a difference maker? The answer is nobody was an all SEC player from that list. That's why Dan Mullen is gone. And so if you want to compete with these big boys, you need 6, because that's what it takes to win. You need to start filling out your roster with 6 all SEC guys in order to really compete at a playoff level in the SEC. And that's what it's going to take. And, we can say, well, it might take a little bit of time. That's not historically how it works. And so I'm sorry. I would love it if he had 7 years to prove that he's going to be able to recruit at this level. He doesn't. He has to do it now, which means that he's got to have meetings with boosters to figure out the best way to get name, image, and likeness money to players. It means he's got to have, an army of staff to make sure that he's free to go build those relationships with everybody. It means he's got to do what he's got to do to bring those guys in, but maybe 5. But he's going to need 6 all. I think he needs 6 all SEC players from this bump class next year. Now, look, if he brings in 6 5-star guys and everybody else is a 3-star, I'll probably still say that's successful, because I think he's got an opportunity then to meet that benchmark. But the reality is that a 9th ranked class in 2019 wasn't even close to good enough. And so what is? Right? I mean, that's where you got to start asking yourself, is if the 9th ranked class wasn't good enough, what is good enough? Okay, well, now let's look at LSU at 5th, right? And if we look at that 2019 class, Derek Stingley, good player. John Emery, he's gotten a few snaps. That was somebody who could have gone to Florida. Marcel Brooks hasn't played that much. Cardell Thomas, Trey Palmer, Maurice Hampton, Sayaki Ika, Tyran Davis-Price, he played a little bit. So you start going down that list of that, even at the 5th ranked class in the country. You're not just pulling all SEC names off of that. Now let's go to Alabama. Right? The first class. You got Trey Sanders played, Evan Neal, you got Jordan Battle, should have gone to Florida. you got Scooby Carter. You just keep going down that list. There's a ton of guys in that Alabama list who are John Mechie, who are contributors, Jaleel Billingsley, who are contributors from that class in 2019. Look, I get that 2019 class is way out from that bump class that Nick Saban had back in 2008, but that bump class in 2008 was unbelievable. I think he had 9 all SEC players from that team, and that's why they won the national championship. That's why they were able to take down Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow, because he was able to build on the guys who were there before, but because he supplemented them with stars, and that's what's going to take. And sorry, that's what's going to take.
I mean, you look at that era. That's Meyer and Saban from that era. That was kind of the birth of modern day recruiting in college football in terms of the intensity level put toward it. I feel like I just think it's extremely. You look at USC is going to be in the hunt this year. I would say to expect a top 3 class this year, you're asking a lot. I mean, do we expect to win national championships every year too? Yeah. Do I think we're going to win one in 2022? No, I don't. But obviously, it's Florida. It's the expectation. I just think it's going to take some time to build the machine that's going to take to catch Georgia, catch Alabama, catch,
See, though, but nobody else is taking
that couple of years.
Nobody else is taking that kind of time to build the machine. I mean, you could say
that Jimbo, it's taking a couple of years.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, that's sliced bread, man. Like, if you look at the past 3 years, they basically recruited at the level that Jimbo was going to recruit at Texas A&M, and they figured something out when it came to name, image, and likeness, and all of a sudden they're recruiting with the big boys. So you have a pattern. Look, Napier knows every dollar that those guys got. He knows what it cost, right? Because I guarantee you that the guys that he was recruiting told him what it was going to take to get him to come to Florida if it came down to money. So he knows what that number is. And so put the plan in place. Like, look, this is big boy football. You don't get to just go out there and say, well, we gave it our best try, but we weren't as good as Alabama and Georgia. Nah, that's not the way it works. You get paid this kind of money to win. And that means winning on the field. That means winning in the weight room. And that means winning in the recruiting trail. And that's really why we're paying Napier. Like, he could be an awful in-game coach, but if he brings elite talent to Gainesville, that is a successful hire, because just like we found out with Ron Zook, who was able to bring elite talent to Gainesville, once Urban Meyer took over and you had an elite coach to go with it, all of a sudden you were winning all over the place. And the issue with Dan Mullen is that we didn't have elite talent in Gainesville. And so you could switch coaches all you wanted, but you were still going to just sort of be, the New Year's Six Bowl, not playoff, unless you got really, really lucky. And look, I get it. I get that it's a tough expectation. Tough. That's what you get paid for to come to the University of Florida. We have 3 national championships and a bunch of SEC championships. We don't sit there and go, well, I'm glad we won the East. Well, I'm glad we beat Kentucky and Vanderbilt. No, you're playing with the big boys, beat the big boys. If you can't beat the big boys, let's get somebody in who can.
Well, you heard it here, everybody. Clock's ticking, Billy. No time. Honeymoon's over.
Absolutely. I gave him grace for 2022's class, man. 2023, no dice.
Hope you enjoyed those 60 days. All right, Will, you got any final thoughts before we head out tonight?
Oh, man, just, hey, it's been fun, right? I mean, it's nice to have hope in the program again. Obviously laying down the gauntlet a little bit for Billy there, but
top 3 or else.
He can handle it, man. And again, I'm not going to kill him for a top 5 class, but I am for top 9.
It's generous,
right? If it comes in at what's that?
That's kind. That's generous of you.
Yeah, I mean, hey, yeah. I'm a generous person, but look, I think it's great to have him here. It's awesome to have the energy at the program. I get reached out to on a daily basis by people who are in Gainesville who just tell me it's different. And, I'm banking on the fact that it's different. I'm banking on the fact that he has this track record, and I'm banking on the fact that he has a plan and a process that I'm seeing and starting to buy into in areas other than just who came for this transition class. And so I have faith that Napier is going to be able to put together a class that matches the expectations I'm putting forward. But the reality is that those expectations have to be met in order to compete the way Florida wants to compete. So, hey, it's not like he's going anywhere after the second year if he doesn't achieve what Will Miles says he needs to achieve. But I think the statistics tell us over time that you need to do that. So I'm excited to have him here. I'm excited for what the program has. I'm really excited about, all the things we got coming up here in the spring and then the summer and then in the fall when Utah kicks off. I wish it was already September, man. I want to see the team kick off, but there's a lot of work to be done before then. And nobody knows that better than Billy Napier. You didn't need me to tell him that. And he holds himself to, he doesn't want to lose to Alabama. I guarantee you he'll send a text to Saban the day he's above him in the rankings when things are final, and he ought to, because at the end of the day, that's what you got to do. Go take down the champ and on the trail first and then on the field afterwards.
I think you're mixing him up with Lane Kiffin, Billy up with Lane Kiffin, but
nah, you know what? I think we're going to see this on the sideline at some point. I think Billy Napier has a very calm demeanor on the outside,
but fiery, no doubt.
I think he's got a competitive dude. You do not get to this spot in life without being a competitive guy. And so, Lane Kiffin sort of hides his insecurities in, posting pictures of license plates and things like that to troll his own fan base sometimes. But I don't think Billy Napier is going to do any of that stuff. I mean, I think he's going to handle himself with class. But to believe that he's not going to give Saban a little when he if he jumps in front of him in a recruiting class, I don't believe that. I think those guys are competitive, and I think they'll let each other know.
What can people expect from Read and Reaction here in the next week?
Oh man, so we got a mailbag going up. We had a bunch of people over at Patreon ask us questions. We're going to try to do that on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So if you'd like to ask us questions, you can go over to patreon.com/readandreaction and ask us questions for the next mailbag that's going to go up. Obviously, all the articles are going up. We're putting up audio versions of those on YouTube as well. That seems to have been really successful. We have a couple of people who've made some snarky comments about it where I'm sort of staring into the camera. But at the end of the day, there are people who seem to enjoy it, so we're going to keep doing that. Obviously, we need people to continue making fun of the fact that I can't quit saying at the end of the day. That seems to have become a common theme in the comments as well. I'm enjoying that. I'm trying to fix it, but it's a slow go. I've been doing this for like 4 years and didn't realize that was my go-to phrase until like 3 weeks ago. So
the robot's becoming self-aware.
So I appreciate that everybody is giving me some hard times on that. It's great. But now and then, you and I are talking about some cool stuff for Patreon that's going to be exclusively to Patreon, probably tied in with recruiting. And then certainly as the season gets closer, making sure we give some people some inside or I guess detailed analysis of what's going to be going on with the program as we get closer to kickoff.
Yeah, stay tuned, everybody. That's our National Signing Day episode. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Really appreciate the support across all the platforms on Read and Reaction, YouTube, Patreon, and the website. We'll keep providing content all through the season. We're not taking any all through the off season here. We're not taking any breaks. Mostly just because we love college football. It's like February. It's February 4th, and I already miss college football. Will
we'd be on the phone
off season.
We'd be on the phone talking about this stuff in the exact same way. Probably a few more vulgarities involved if we were just talking one-on-one, but that we were joking before we were joking before we came on that if we ever put the uptakes or the outtakes up on Patreon, we might be upset or we might be in trouble. But look, I mean, this is fun. This is a passion for us, right? And we enjoy doing it, so we appreciate everybody going on the ride with us. And we're expecting that ride to be much, much better under the Billy Napier era. And hey, I hope he wins a championship, because nothing's going to do more for this to make it fun than riding that roller coaster all the way to a championship, man.
Better get it done in 2022 or else
2023.
Okay, all right. So we got some. Okay, we pumped the brakes in some areas tonight. That's
no, just recruiting's 2023 and then the championship's 2024. Let's go. Come on.
I'm on board. Let's do it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week with another episode of Stand Up and Holler. Have a great day. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.